Carol Wilson, to Carter.
To see you all.
Yeah.
Lexi, do we still have a steady stream in the weight room, or is it slowing down a little bit?
It's slowed down. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd say we're okay to start.
All right. Well, welcome again, everyone. So good to see all of your faces. Especially good to welcome back Ed Baker, Laurie Burt, and Bill Hsiao.
Home run Baker.
I'm gonna start with a couple of technological requests. First, I'm gonna now ask you all to mute yourselves. We can unmute and have a little more back and forth conversation later. But if you could all mute yourselves, and or we may do that for you, with the exception of Ed, Bill, and Laurie. And I'd also invite you pretty soon, if not now, to switch to speaker view. And you can do that by clicking across the top of your Zoom screen and switch from gallery view to speaker view. I hope you can all figure out how to do that. For now, there may be different faces that you'll be seeing. And finally, no pressure, once again, folks, to have your face shown on the screen or to be joining via video. If you'd prefer to join just by phone and listen in, that's absolutely okay. We know many people are struggling with the extent of screen time these days, but you're certainly welcome to listen in. So Lexi, did I miss anything in terms of the logistics of this call?
No, I think we're all set. We're recording. Everyone's muted. I think we're ready to go.
Fabulous. I'm gonna guess that many of you were on our first call on May 17th when we heard from Ed Baker on public health and leadership. And in May, boy, that feels like 3 years ago now since that call. And I want to thank Ed again for kicking off this three-part series in such a helpful and humble way. Ed spoke about the pandemic and some lessons from public health, which is his area of expertise. The series, as I think you know, is How to Make a Better Future, Perspectives Amidst a Pandemic. And we have three experts in their fields who are joining us. We were supposed to hear from Laurie Burt, who is an expert in climate change law in particular, environmental law. We're supposed to hear from her on May 31st. However, given the turn of events in our nation, we decided to postpone that. We hope until June 28th, but we still need to firm that up. However, today, we will be hearing from Bill Hsiao, who for some of you needs no introduction. Bill has been a member of First Church for many years, decades, in fact, where he shared his gifts in all kinds of committees and leadership. What some of you may not know is that he is a world-renowned economist who teaches at the Harvard School of Public Health. He studied healthcare systems for more than 40 years. Besides the state of Vermont, he has designed reforms of national healthcare systems for 9 countries. Presently, he serves on the Governor's Commission on Healthy Californians for All at the invitation of California Governor Gavin Newsom. In fact, he shared with us just before you all came on the call that they had an encouraging meeting yesterday, that commission. Bill also wrote an article in the January-February issue of 2020 Foreign Affairs called How to Fix American Healthcare, What Other Countries Can and Can't Teach the United States. He has consulted with presidential candidates, presidents. There is no more expert maybe in the field of healthcare policy in the state than Bill, and he happens to be with us today, ready to share with us some insights about how to make a better future. We may think that this topic is not necessarily as relevant as hearing from Ed, say 2 weeks ago, about public health and the pandemic. And yet, what is more important than healthcare in terms of addressing this pandemic? And by the same token, healthcare is one of the, I'd say, leading indicators of disparity in our country, of inequality, and particularly racial inequality, which we hope Bill will address today as well. So this feels like an incredibly timely topic for our conversation today. Bill, we thank you for the preparation. Ed and Laurie, we thank you for being with us to respond to Bill and offer him some questions from your own expertise and experience. The three of you have, and I, as a privilege, have been part of some planning conversations, and I wish we could have recorded those too, because the level of conversation is remarkable. And so Bill, we'll hand it to you without much further ado, and I'll just say we'll let Ed and Laurie enter in with a few questions at first, and as we did last time, we'll invite you to post questions in the chat, and I'm going to monitor those questions, and when the time comes, we'll pivot to sharing those questions with Bill. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. Are we good to go then? Ed, Laurie, you want to chime in and share anything before we hand it over to Bill? Okay. Bill Hsiao, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your experience, stories, and expertise.
Thank you, Dan. With that introduction, I think I should shut up. It's a privilege to talk to each one of you. And we have so many friends at the First Church, and it's wonderful to have this talk. I hope you will raise your voice and ask questions as well as give your views. Dan already said healthcare may be still a timely topic, and I will argue healthcare touches everyone, and frequently, because we all have some problems even when you're young. COVID pandemic and the racial injustice that we have just experienced or in the midst of it, I've called the two big earthquakes. These earthquakes unmasked the dysfunctional, inequitable, and the inefficient health systems that we have. And I will elaborate in a few minutes. 2 weeks ago, Ed Becker talks about how inadequate our health system prevented COVID and treat the patient. And he also talked about what's known and unknown. But here today, I'm going to give you what's known. COVID put a glaring light on how inequitable our healthcare system is. Let me illustrate with two data. 13% of Americans are Afro-Americans, yet 75% of people who died from COVID were Afro-Americans. That's how unfair the system is. Afro-Americans' lifespan is 10 years less than the white Americans, I'm sorry. These are the evidence no one can deny. Well, you may begin to ask, why do we have such a dismal health care system then? Let me offer the opinion of many experts. We believe one major fundamental cause lies in our social ethics. That is, the conflict between the individualism Americans embrace and the individual desires versus communal well-being and obligations. And that's reflected in our healthcare system. You might ask, how do you get interested in this topic and wasted so many decades of your time on it? Let me share with you how I got interested in it. At age 12, 6 months after I arrived in New York City with my family from China, my father had a severe asthmatic attack. He wanted a quick recovery, so his doctor said, let's take you to the hospital for oxygen therapy. The doctor ordered an ambulance to take my father to the hospital. When the ambulance arrived, my father could not bend down to get into the ambulance. An attendant pushed him flat, then pulled him onto a stretcher. Then the attendant slammed the door and drove off. Some of you know asthmatic patients cannot lie flat. They will choke and they cannot breathe. Obviously, the attendants of the ambulance did not know that. My father died on arrival at the hospital. I could not say anything because I did not know enough English then. That's my personal encounter very early with American healthcare system. Later, when I worked in the federal government on healthcare policy, a foundation wanted us to see the healthcare in some poor regions and took us to Mississippi Delta area. I saw the poor facilities and the lack of qualified practitioners in Mississippi Delta area. And I saw how the poor people and the Afro-Americans just don't have access or nor can they afford the healthcare. That's United States. Then more recently, when Vermont commissioned my team to design Medicare for All type of system for the state, I attended a grassroots town hall meeting. Afterwards, a middle-aged woman walked up to me and hugged me and pleaded with me to do something about US healthcare system. She cried. She told me how she lost her small farm, which supported her, and her home when she became bankrupt from medical expenses. Now she's homeless and without the income. That, friends, is how I've decided I'm going to devote it to healthcare systems. So let me move on to briefly describe the broken system, US healthcare, that we have. Unlike what Ed Becker said about COVID, he said there are unknowns, knowns, and unknowables. Let me give you the good news. We know our problems in healthcare and the causes for them for more than 15 years with scientific studies, evidence, and analysis. So this is a known problem, And also the solution is also no. Then let me turn and briefly summarize what are our major problems. There are three. First, our health insurance is tied to our employment. No other country, advanced country has that. So, and also not all employers provide health insurance to their workers. So when we lose our job or change jobs, we may lose our health insurance and lose our ability to afford health care. 30 million Americans today are without any health insurance. Another 43 million Americans have only modest health insurance coverage. These 73 million Americans make up 1 out of every 5 American households. That's the inequitable and just system we have. At least that's my editorial. The second major problem confronting our healthcare is that it's affordability. Majority of Americans do not believe they can afford the health care if they become seriously ill. The latest survey, nationwide survey, found a majority of Americans worry they cannot afford the necessary health care if they get seriously ill. Their worries are fully justified. This is the evidence. Every year, 500,000 American households file bankruptcy, citing healthcare expenditure is the major reason for their bankruptcy. 500,000 households every year. Then let me turn to the cost of these bankruptcies. The American healthcare is the most expensive because we have a fragmented system with vast amount of waste, frauds, and inefficiency. This is all documented. If you want to read the reports, I'd be happy to give you the references. In 2005, the National Academy of Medicine organized an unbiased expert commission to study the waste and efficiencies in our healthcare system. It found we're wasting 30% of our annual health spending, 30%. This amounts to $1 trillion each year. May I give you an idea of what $1 trillion means? It's a 1 with 12 zeros behind it. First Church Cambridge's annual budget is about $1 million. $1 trillion will finance 1 million First Church Cambridge in the United States every year. $1 trillion will buy 35 million new cars for Americans every year. That's how much money we are wasting through healthcare system we have structured. Then let me give you some more personal data. In 2018, we spent $11,000 each person, twice as much as Canadians and West Europeans. But what outcome did we get? Our health status is the worst among the Canadians and West Europeans. So we're not getting the value for our money, even if you're willing to pay for it. The Afro-Americans and Latinos and the poor suffer the most from our system, the inadequate health care and the impoverishment that result from it. And the third reason is the problem we have is uneven quality of health care. The best medicine in the world can be found in Arlington, Belmont, and Brookline. But you look at the quality of healthcare in Roxbury and Mattapan, and you will see the vast difference right in the same city. Well, then let me quickly turn to, do we have the solutions? Yes, we do. We found the solutions through our own research and analysis, as well as look at the experience from other nations that walked ahead of us. The best solution is called the single payer system, which is illustrated by Medicare for All, proposed by Senator Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Single payer, as said by Physicians for National Health Plan, which is the alliance of practicing physicians. They said Medicare for All will save lives and save money. Then why we would not want to save lives and save money? A single payer plan will provide every American health insurance coverage, untie the insurance from employment. Second, Medicare for All will provide a uniform and comprehensive health insurance to everyone to remove the current inequity in our system. Let me then move to how will you pay for Medicare for All? Now we have to take a deeper dive. Look, how much savings can we produce if United States adopt Medicare for All? I already mentioned there's roughly a $1 trillion of waste in our current system. We could save 1/3 of that, which is $350 billion every year, by removing or reducing the administrative costs of our multiple health insurance plans that operates. Remove the administrative costs and the hassle of enrolling in health plans, insurance plans, and filing claims. We could save another $180 billion each year through Medicare for All by reducing the abuse and fraudulent claims made by providers, which was estimated by FBI, it made up 8% of the Medicare claims. A single payer plan will bargain with the pharmaceutical companies for lower prices. If we can reduce our drug prices down to what Western European countries pay, and as well as what Canadians pay, we could save $180 billion every year. By the way, no one disputes these figures. And well, that's the savings. I gave you some of the breakdowns. However, Medicare for All require us to spend more. We will have to spend $350 billion every year to cover the uninsured people, as well as the people who have only modest health insurance. We will have to actually provide a transitional income and training programs for those administrative staff who run insurance plans and also filing claims so they can find new jobs. We also have to actually spend money to really boost finance, increase the financing for prevention and for building more community health centers in the poor areas and in underserved communities. That will require probably another, together, $150 billion. So if you add up how much we will save and how much we'll have to spend additionally, that will net an amount which will give every American, I want to emphasize, another $1,000 in your pocket every year. Again, there are dozens of studies being done, and every study agree with this conclusion. So with that, let me pause and say, gee, you're giving the magic. There must be something wrong with what you just said.
Well, Bill, I'll react by saying I doubt that there's something wrong with what you just said. You've illuminated our minds and really warmed our hearts, particularly with those stories at the outset about your own personal experiences. It's a personal thing. And as you said, healthcare is something that really affects all of us. I would also broaden it out, as you know, to say it's all about health. It's health care, but you focused a lot on prevention and things that we've already talked about before. Let me see if we could drill down a little bit on things that might be exciting to you now, perhaps sources of hope amidst a very, very complex situation. Dan alluded just to something that happened to you yesterday with this California group. And could you say a little bit about what you're most excited about, particularly things perhaps that are happening at the state level, which seem to show some changes of heart, Bill?
Well, yesterday's events, particularly expressed by the public, surprised me. The public was was given to participate and observe the commission's meeting. Everyone spoke up, said, this is a new beginning. This is a new opportunity. And our healthcare problems really being exposed now under a glaring light. Let's do something bold. Let's not just tinker with it. Because in the political world, among the closer circles, I hear people, political leaders say, well, the pressure may be there, but it's just too much to take a bold step. But I heard differently from the public yesterday.
One follow-on question, and then others may have additional questions, of course. Let's just say you were speaking to individuals that are now positioning, hopefully President to be Biden. I'll disclose my political affiliation here, with what might happen in a new presidency and a new administration. Would there be one or two things that you would be saying to those both elected officials and those that are advising those elected officials as they put together plans for a new administration? What would you tell them?
Wow. My 2 cents worth is that I think they could take some concrete steps. And if the budget situation permits, you can really expand the coverage. But meanwhile, you can actually produce some savings. For example, we can bargain, actually pass a law, say there will be a unified bargaining with pharmaceutical industry. Like I said, even if we don't reduce the price to the European or Canadian price level, even to only get half of that savings, that could mean nationwide could amount to 80 to 90 billion dollars. You can provide the insurance for many people, as well as build more community health centers for the poor and the Afro-Americans. These things, they're incremental steps you can do. And also to really put in unified standard electronic record systems. Right now, we're wasting every year administratively billions of dollars by having multiple electronic record systems. We're wasting physicians' time, nurses' time, and you can do that by actually mandate a unified record system, at least for each state.
So Bill, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I learn so much every time I hear you speak about this subject, and I love the facts and figures, but I also love your passionate observation in the outset is that one thing that stands in our way in the United States is this tension, as it is in so many policies of public welfare, between individualism and the communal. And you have spoken so eloquently about really the breach of the social contract that has been laid bare by COVID, by the Black Lives Matter, and by the inequitable impacts of both long-term lack of healthcare and the impact of this pandemic in so many ways. So I'm always looking, on the side of where is the hope. What is the teachable moment for the United States? And it has happened to us at different periods of time in the past, where we put aside partisanship and really realize that we need to take a leap forward. Yes, there may be incremental glide paths there, but the minute it's like, how do we do it? We seem to become very partisan, fractious, it's too expensive, we're in a recession, we can't do it. Other countries have taken this leap of faith, that they are better off economically and in terms of their long-term stability and welfare if they have a national healthcare system. So is this a teachable moment that we're in terms of public consciousness?
I personally believe so, because I work in foreign countries. We often actually start with the leaders and then go to the general public, asking people to think that is healthcare and health, that's something fundamental for humans' well-being. And usually the people right away say yes. Then you ask the question, do you believe that all citizens in your nation should have equitable and good health care and to improve their health? And then that's where debates occur. America went through that with education.
Yes.
We have free education through 12th grade. But we never had this kind of discussion. What's the social ethics? What's the ethical principle behind healthcare? And I think with the COVID, we could have that conversation now.
Thank you.
Bill, I'm going to offer a question from the chat that seems particularly relevant to Laurie's question. which comes from Lindsay Miller, and she's asking, what are the main reasons the American healthcare system is not changing?
Well, this give me the opportunity to move to my last part of the talk. That's because United States has built up very powerful, strong, and wealthy stakeholders. The major opponent to this, of course, is the private insurance industry. Every year, they have right now $1.4 trillion of revenue, which they can use the part to oppose you politically and advertise on television like they did when they opposed Clinton's reform bill. Another major industry that opposed it is really pharmaceutical industry. And the United States big farmers are the most profitable industry. And of course, they have the wealth and the lobbying organization to oppose you. But there's another reason. American people are afraid of fear of change. When they are not clear what the future may be, they are very suspicious, and so more than half of the Americans then say, gee, maybe I don't want change. And but to me, that can be altered through public education. And that's where I think First Church members can do a great deal individually to get informed and educate your neighbors, our friends about it.
Thanks, Bill. We have a few more questions coming in from the chat now. Dave Kidder asks, can you comment on how the way healthcare providers are paid can affect cost and quality? Let me say that again. Can you comment on how the way that healthcare providers are paid can affect cost and quality?
Thanks, Dave. You're an expert in this, so I see that's an expert question. United States started out paying hospitals and physicians on fee-for-service. So for the physician and hospitals to get the revenue, first they have to wait until the patient gets sick and want health care. And then it depends on how many units of and what kind of services you give them, that determines your revenue. So consequently, United States have the over-provision of health services, particularly on tests, non-invasive tests, like MRI. The per person basis, United States have twice as many MRI done on us than Europeans. That's because our payment system, if I order that, I increase my revenue. But Dave, you know, United States trying to shift away from the fee-for-service payment system for the past 30 years. But only half of the payment now are based on non-fee-for-service. And that's partly is because the resistance by the hospitals and doctors. So it's, at the end, it comes down to political power and influence.
As is so often the case, right? Another question from Karen. Currently, those on Medicare find it necessary to purchase supplementary coverage for prescriptions and a portion of their medical bills. Would Medicare for All also require this? or would Medicare for All cover more than Medicare currently does?
Medicare for All, as proposed by Senator Sanders or Warren, covers much, much more, including all the long-term care, including dental. And that's why it's quite expensive. And so basically you remove any role for private insurance. You do not have to get any kind of supplementary insurance and the Medicare for All. But then some other political leaders may propose something less. And so you have to look at that feature. But what's on the table right now in the United States is very comprehensive coverage, and you do not have to buy any supplementary insurance to cover drugs, long-term care, nursing home, dental, eyeglasses, all these other ancillary equipment.
Thank you. So another question from Holly. Don't be shy, folks. Feel free to throw some more questions into the chat. I have one, and then I'd like to circle back to Laurie and Ed to see if they have some further questions. But from Holly, what are your suggestions for how smaller voices, the ones without wealth and lobby power, can be heard? And I just want to insert a little editorial comment here that there are some people on the call, including you, Holly, who have been to many local actions of our Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, where we have advocated for access and affordability, and kind of we're a part of building a blueprint of, quote, Romney Care that led to Obamacare, and GBIO is still active in those conversations. But Bill, you know, for a broader audience, how do smaller voices make themselves heard, aside from maybe the polls, which would be a big one? But how can people organize and advocate around this complex, vast topic?
Well, I think my experience in Vermont taught me really grassroots organizations has a powerful influence. And but one of the key things is, besides advocacy, is education. So at the grass level, you can actually talk very intelligently. You understand the trade-offs, because politicians or policymakers always talk about trade-offs. You have to understand there could be some trade-offs. But in the Medicare for All, the trade-offs is not serious. It will displace some people from their jobs, like the claim clerks and the insurance administrators. You will reduce or remove private health insurance. That actually is a very difficult problem. So then the decision making will be, is there some other, could you really wipe out a particular industry which have existed for almost 100 years? And is that industry necessary?
All right, we have several more questions now. Bill, maybe you can budget your time a little bit so we can try to hear from everyone. Not that you haven't yet. You've been great. Dick Carter asks, what went wrong in Vermont, and how can we learn from that? Or Gay Harder asked that, I should say.
Vermont, what went wrong in Vermont was that the politics changed. They passed a law to implement Medicare for All, but delayed the implementation, waiting for Obamacare to be implemented to lock in the federal subsidy that will come into Vermont. In between that time and their intended implementation, the Vermont had a catastrophe implementing Obamacare. So people lost faith to say, if you cannot even implement the electronic enrollment system, how could you implement a much more complex reform? That was one reason. And so mainly, and also I may add, labor unions then want a very comprehensive 100% coverage. When we did the work, we did the political analysis, we provide only 89%, we cover 89% of healthcare expenses. When you go to 100%, that's higher taxes. And then we knew that, and that the opposition will be much greater. But the labor union, during the interim, labor union pushed through a revision of our proposal. And that actually then also blow up, caused failure of public
More
support.
questions. Thank you, Bill. Phil Jones asked, we here in Boston, and I would add Cambridge in specific, are so very close to major power centers in terms of big pharma. Does Massachusetts have the legal power to bring private companies to public accountability? Does Massachusetts as a state have any authority over what pharma is doing?
I'm sorry, that's beyond my expertise. I really did not study the legal aspect of this. And I know big pharma is very influential because they have many research labs. And they also support my colleagues in Harvard Medical School.
All right. Kathy Garnett asks, I'm aware that in the UK and Canada, individuals buy other insurance or go to private clinics. Is that true? And if so, why?
In Canada, they are not allowed to buy individual insurance. If any physician accepts private insurance, then they lose their privilege to get a reimbursement from the public National Health Insurance Program for the patients who are insured under that. So their providers say, basically, I won't accept any private insurance. In England, they do. Roughly 10% of the British people have private insurance. They opt out National Health Service. They are the most affluent people, and they are the large of them are expats working in Great Britain. So in most countries other than Canada, when you talk about national health insurance or Medicare for all, it covers usually between 90 to 95% of people, not 100%, because that most affluent, wealthy people, they want something better. And you cannot afford the private rooms, including you can get flying services to Switzerland to see a specialist or come to Mass General for special treatment. But the affluent people want that.
Yeah.
The most affluent people, I should say.
This question may follow a bit from Nancy. What you are describing is a system that serves many powerful stakeholders. And some people, for instance, those who have jobs with good care, people with more resources, jobs with good health care. The people who the system is working for tend to be white. Does that passive racism lens ring true for you?
Well, I think that really reflects American society. Yes, but I don't think it's intended racial discrimination, but it's through our job markets, our corporate practices, who gets top jobs and so forth.
Circling back to one that I missed before from Mark and or Sally O'Brien, where did that one go? Yeah, is there a way of using people's positive experience with Medicare to shape the public support of Medicare for all?
Yes, definitely you can. But as the earlier question raised, people buy supplementary insurance to Medicare. Medicare was passed as a compromise. Basically, only covers roughly about 70% of the medical expenses for the elderly. Because the more you cover, the higher the tax rate has to be. That's where the compromises occurs. And that's where the negotiation occurs. So yes, I think today, if you, the polls show 57% Americans support Medicare for all. And why Senator Bernie Sanders used that term is because he knew majority of the people have a favorable impression of Medicare.
On that note, somebody else posted that 17% of Americans say they can trust the federal government all or most of the time, but 83% do not. We're at an all-time low in terms of trusting the federal government. How do we speak to that response? Brent Coffin, I think he meant that for everybody, but it came to me. So what's your sense of that one?
My sense is if I'm designing right now, I would design using really a nonprofit organization to run it. And also let people who have to pay directly negotiate with those people who receive the payment. That's how I designed for Taiwan. Taiwan's president was the one who educated me. He said, I want to take the government out the middle. Once the government is in the middle, it becomes very political. And all the pressure is on the government. I want you to design a system, take the government out the middle.
So I have a question about the politics, and then I want to circle back to Laurie and Ed, and I think there's one more in the chat, but the political, at least until recently, healthcare was an issue that could polarize a conversation around a July 4th barbecue like that. And I'm curious to know, I mean, a lot of people on this call, I'm guessing would being supportive of Medicare for all. But Bill, in your conversations across the country, across the globe, how do you speak to people who have a much different perspective on this, different values on this, say, who don't want an individual mandate, or who are holding much different values? How do you cross that bridge? How do you speak to them in ways that there can be some common ground? You gotta come to my 4th of July barbecue, by the way, because not this year, but yeah. How do you talk to folks who are from a different perspective?
I often ask people, what kind of health care do you want for your grandchildren? Because they're not sure exactly their grandchildren will be asked to go to the best college in the United States and so forth. Do you think healthcare is a basic necessity for everyone's well-being? How do you assure your grandchildren get that? And then we can actually have a more neutral conversation.
Brilliant. I'm taking that one to my in-laws next time I have a chance to gather with them. One more question from the chat, and then we'll give it to Laurie and Ed. From Kyoko, I'm curious, charitable mind to generously donate in the US here, but a protective impulse to not change the healthcare system. These coexist in America. Do you have a sense of how those competing interests exist? America is very generous on the one hand, and yet this protective impulse not to change our healthcare system.
This give me a chance to talk about another ideology many Americans have. when they don't go into deep into something. That is, most Americans believe the market and they are against the government. They don't have the confidence in the government. American healthcare is built on the market, basically built on the market principles. While the other countries realize the market fails in healthcare, and they shifted to more government plays a major role. And so Americans can hold these two very different ideas and actually struggle with it. And many Americans have a negative reaction when they feel you're moving away from a market system. I encounter many people like that. Just the gut feeling is, if you move away from a market system, things are going to be worse.
One more came in from a doctor in our congregation, Jane Matthews. What would happen to all the current paycheck deductions and employer contributions to private insurance, which we currently have?
That depends on how we finance Medicare for all. All these deductions and payments will actually go away, including your pay out of pocket. But then there has to be some kind of contribution or tax pay for this. And that's the barrier the public don't understand. Right now, we pay for healthcare from many pockets. And the Medicare for all, we're going to be shifted to one pocket, which is some kind of a wage contribution or some tax. And so they feel they're paying more taxes, but they don't look at, they actually don't pay out from the other pockets they're paying now for healthcare. Right now, we count that we pay for healthcare at least through 8 to 10 pockets, including your tax, local tax, which may support some of the local hospitals or clinics.
Yeah. Thank you. I so admire your capacity to answer all of these questions coming from so many different directions. It's amazing. Such a complex topic, and you have a gift at breaking it down. I wish I could put you on speed dial when I get mired in healthcare confusion. Let's take it back to Ed and Laurie to bring some other questions up, and then we'll start to close out.
Laurie, why don't you go first, please?
You beat me to it, Ed. I guess I come back, Bill, and just thank you for all of this. And Dan, I hope you and Lexi will save the questions in the chat room in case we haven't gotten to them, because this will be an ongoing conversation. I do hope that it will be. But when I look for hope in the future, and coming from a faith-based community here, is, Bill, I want to know, it's like, how do we overcome fear? We've had fear at different points with the pandemic, fear of ultimately change, like so many policy issues, it can quickly get very complex and overwhelming. But at its core is that if this is the right thing to do, if this is something that will lift all boats, whatever rings your bell, how do we overcome that fear in a way that is transformational? It is nonpartisan. It comes from the people. We do not want to live in this kind of inequitable society. We want public education. We want public health. How can we simplify this and peel away that fear?
Wow. You have any harder questions?
I know.
Only the easy ones.
Softball for the end.
I really don't have a good answer, but to me, if I'm closely involved, I would advise the political leaders to assure people, one, you can still have the choice of your provider. I had students did a poll in California. They found people who are really reluctant or opposed Medicare for all come from 2 or 3 different worries. One is they're going to lose their choice of providers. And that was one of the major reasons. And the other one is they have to pay out more. But when we explain to them, these people being polled, you may be paying more in taxes or contributions of some form, but you're going to reduce your total spending from other pockets. Then people really understand that, and then their opinion begin to shift. So nowadays, really, there are ways to educate the public to have, on the margin, there's a change of views. Not everyone, but a significant percentage change their views.
Thank you, Ed. There's another question, and I want to put this to both you and Bill before we hear your questions, Ed. I missed this one. It's, please discuss the relation of the public health system and overall healthcare and ways to improve. Either of you have thoughts about that, since you're both experts in those 2 fields?
Well, I guess I'll start by saying that only about 3% of our nation's health expenditures go to public health and prevention. If one were to adopt a more comprehensive approach, as Bill just described, that could actually increase financial support for the prevention side of the house. Bill, you might want to say some more about that because these are interrelated. It's a great question.
Well, I would just add, definitely you want to integrate the public health more closely with the health care, particularly what Americans are suffering from nowadays from so-called chronic illness like diabetes, hypertension, pulmonary obstructions. And those can be prevented, as well as I believe we need a much stronger centralized reporting system on infectious diseases, and really a much more coherent coordination between states, cities, and the federal government. And that also is to integrate that into healthcare. Like once virus break out, then people have to be hospitalized. And you have to coordinate, tie those 2 together.
Thank you.
Exactly. Well, if I can maybe offer, I hate to say this is the final question. I know we'd probably like to keep going for a long time, but I want to get back to a basic question, Bill, that you posed. There's an equity argument for Medicare for all. That is that it really expands coverage to those that are not covered. But there's an economic argument, which you've talked about. You're an economist, and you've clearly explained that to us very, very well. And you said that there's $1 trillion with a T of waste in the system. So I want to see if you could wrap it up by the economic argument piece, and particularly, what does the business community have to say about this? We've talked about the insurance industry. Obviously, that's a business. But the people that are really paying the bills in many instances with this employment-based system are the employers, the big employers, and the cost is going up. Is there a movement there at all on the economic argument particularly coming from the business community, to want change?
Well, yes, now this give me a chance to also summarize where I think the motivating or moving force, which may bring about a big change. The employers has not been motivated to change the system because they look at the compensation package for the employees as a total. So if I give you $50,000 of salary and I give you another $15,000 of health insurance, that's total compensation of $65,000. If the health insurance cost goes up, I actually reduce your cash wage increase. So to them, it's not the skin off their back. Economic studies have proven that. Good econometric study can model that and test it. So that's why the employers are not that much behind it. It's not no skin off their back. However, now the healthcare cost is rising so rapidly. The organized labor particularly are asking for higher salary increases at the same time keep their health insurance. And the employers found they cannot do the both. And this led to strikes or threat to strikes. Like that's what led to right now, Harvard graduate student union strike, by the way, okay? Just give you a concrete local example. So the employers now begin to say, gee, I need a way out of this. And that, if I may give me the chance to summarize on a hopeful note, I think the United States has 3 big changes which make a big reform likely. May not be this year, but definitely within a decade, in my view. First is the physicians are changing their views. I worked in many countries. I have not seen a country reform its healthcare system without the clear backing of majority of the doctors. In the United States, majority of doctors are against Medicare for all because it will hurt their pocketbook. However, the United States has a shift that more physicians are become employees of hospitals or clinics. They are a salary plus a bonus. Consequently, you see the American physicians are shifting their views, supporting a Medicare for all type of plan. And right now, close to 50% of the American doctors are on salary plus bonus. Once it's reached 55, close to 60%, I think you'll see a big tilt. That's one hopeful sign. Second hopeful sign is what I just explained about the employers. And I think more and more employers sees this is not sustainable. And they're going to be keep facing labor tension and strikes. Last but not least, I think that's what Bernie Sanders have done. He led a movement. American people are much more conscious of it. Then the question is, what would the grassroots, including First Church members, are going to take up to push that movement, sustain it, and even improve the solutions that may be on the table. And I think that movement is going to be there, and particularly with the COVID, and also the injustice, inequity shown in healthcare to the minority groups in the United States, particularly Afro-Americans. I think that will push us. That's why I'm hopeful, and I think our church members have a personal role in this.
Bill, thank you so much for clarifying the huge questions that we all have around healthcare. Thank you for pointing us a way forward and inviting us to participate. Thank you for sharing how we can make a better future together. Thanks to Ed, thanks to Laurie as well. Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to invite us to close with a prayer first, so that those who may want to go out into the beautiful day can do so, but hopefully we can have a few minutes left for some 60-person Zoom banter and exchange and the fun of that too. But let's pray first. Loving God, God who breathes health and healing into our hearts and minds and bodies, we turn to you today with grateful hearts, grateful for expertise that we have heard about and heard from on this call, grateful for Bill, for his story, his passion for the career he has made in changing and reforming healthcare around the globe and in the United States too. We thank you for all the gifts that have been shared on this call, and we ask, God, that you be in the midst of the grassroots, and even beneath those grassroots, that we may dig into the root and the soil of your Spirit, from which we learn the gifts of equality and of dignity and of care for our neighbors. And hope, God, give us hope that if not this year, then in the next decade, we will learn to be better stewards of our resources, be more caring of all of your children, more mindful of the disparities, and that we may yet transform our system, which is so badly broken right now, God, and these systems that are so badly broken. Give us your hope, God. Give us your strength. Give us your love. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. I suggest people switch back to gallery view so we can see all of the faces who have been joining us. And if you were don't have your videos showing, you might start your videos back up for a moment. And Lexi, can we unmute everybody, or do we have to ask people to do that on their own?
I just unmuted everyone.
All right, everybody's unmuted. So with that, let's give Bill and Ed and Laurie a big round of applause. If you can hear that. Thank you so much, Bill, for your time and expertise.
I'm going to get those guys down.
All right.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to my friends.
Rich
Thank you,
conversation.
Bill.
Thank you. This will be, we'll have a recording. It will go online. And we will save the chat in case there were some questions we didn't get to. And we'll look ahead to part 3 of this series on climate change and dig into some of those challenges as well, and to where we can find hope in terms of next steps for our future.
Later on this afternoon, you'll be able to find this video either on our blog, on a blog post, and on Facebook. So either way.
Blessings on your days, everybody.
It was so lovely to see you all.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Feel free to stay on and chat amongst yourselves.
And now.